Good morning. My name is Emily Kittrell, and I'm an assistant director at NISTS, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you to my favorite session of the conference. I know it hasn't even happened yet, but I already know I'm going to love it, and I think that you will too. You are sitting in our action-focused workshop. And we design these, if you're new to NISTS, you need to know that we design these very, very intentionally. I don't know about you, but I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with conferences. Now, I know that's weird, because that's what I do for a living. But I don't know, maybe you're like me. It's great, because you're here with people, and you're networking, and you're thinking, and you're talking, and it's wonderful. But it is so much information being thrown at you over a short period of time, and it's hard to cram it all in your mind. So we know that, and we've designed this session to intentionally give you time to think, to pause, to reflect. So that's what this is all about. Today, in our action-focused workshop, we're going to challenge you to learn a little bit, to reflect a little bit, and to do a little bit. So it is a very active session. You'll want to have some pen and paper handy with you, because you're going to be taking lots of notes and following along with the speakers. Okay? But our action-focused workshops introduce attendees to cutting-edge, that's right, cutting-edge transfer concepts and tools, and then allow you plenty of time to explore those ideas and practice new techniques so that when you get back to your home campus, you feel ready to go, and you're going to wrap your colleagues into that activity too. It gives you a jump start on some of the things that you're thinking about here at the conference, and it sends you off with a plan. So I'm pretty excited. Now, I know that according to this schedule, today, you are expecting the legend herself, Dr. Heather Adams, and her colleague Ben from the Aspen Institute to deliver their mini transfer intensive. I'm very sorry to say, you might have guessed, they're in DC, so guess who is not with us? Then we found out yesterday that they were indeed snowed in, absolutely no alternate flights, and we tried it, but it just wasn't going to work to Zoom them in for the session. But have no fear. Because one of the other awesome things about being at a transfer-focused conference, transfer experts everywhere are right there ready to pitch in their time and their expertise. And we're particularly fortunate because our advisory board has some of those very transfer experts, and they have so willingly stepped up, ready to pinch hit, and we have designed what I think is going to be a really awesome session and workshop for you today. Just so you know, we are working with Heather and Ben to try to see if we can deliver their content a little later. They just didn't have enough time to pivot today. So do watch your email because we'll let you know when that opportunity to actually do their workshop comes up. So we're still working on it, still planning it, but keep an eye out for those messages. I want to tell you a little bit about the speakers that you're going to learn from today. So you may know Dr. Alfred Herrera from UCLA. He has most recently written with his colleagues, Power to the Transfer. Yeah, you know it. We are very excited to learn from his wisdom today, so he'll tell you a little bit more about himself in just a moment. We also have Rojas. So she is here. Absolutely. I mean, you guys know them. These are legends. But she is at the Maricopa Community College District in Arizona, and she has most recently written a chapter for the transfer experience from the Gardner Institute. She's got her chapter on PLA, and so she's going to tell you some more about that. We also have Daugherty, my friend from Education Design Lab. If you haven't worked with Leslie yet, get ready because she's the one who helped us pilot action-focused workshops several years ago. So we've got the OG right here with us to help with this session. We met Leslie through their project, the Seamless Transfer Pathways project that has now wrapped up, but she can give you some updates on what she's working on now. Really excited. And also my good friend Mark Allen Poisel, who is now at the University of Central Florida. You may also know this book, his Building Transfer Pathways. It's one I recommend frequently. So super excited to have our in-house advocacy expert to speak with us today. So the layout, yeah, absolutely. The layout for today is going to look a little something like this. Each of these experts is going to come and talk to you for just a little bit, give you some bite-sized wisdom, drop that knowledge on you, and then give you an opportunity to reflect about what they've said. So we'll kind of go talking, reflection. But then we'll invite all of our experts up on stage so that you can ask them questions and really dig into what we've talked about today and sort of the plans that you're building. At the end, we will do an actual workshop where you are developing an action plan to walk back to your campus and have some steps ready to go, how you're going to approach whatever it is you decide to implement. So I don't know, are you guys ready? Yeah. There he is. Okay, we're going to start with Alfred. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning. We're really excited to be here. No, it's not the filler or the replacements. It's actually in prep for the Super Bowl halftime show with Dr. Dre, Eminem, and the rest, we have decided that we're going to put on a show for you today, and we really want to engage in some discussion. So this is about what we do, why we do it, how we do it, who we do it for, and why it is so critical for us. And so the people that will be speaking have specific areas that we decided we were going to talk about, but it's really wide open. It's really about all the things that are important as we discuss transfer. So let's get started. So again, my name is Alfred Herrera. I'm the Assistant Dean, and I direct the Center for Community College Partnerships at UCLA. I have been at UCLA longer than probably half of you have been alive. I'm not sure I would say celebrated, but I celebrated 40 years at UCLA last year and have been engaged in transfer work for almost every single one of those years. So for me, transfer is a passion. For me, it's important. I was not a transfer student, and I'll be the first to say that. I do not know that experience. But I have lived that experience through the thousands of students that we have been working with and helping in the work that I do. I'm a first-generation low-income student. My parents were, my father was a laborer, my mother was cleaned houses and raised families. And I'm the first in my family to go to college. There were 6 of us. I'm number 5. I'm a Chicano from California, 4th generation. And so for me, college was not something that was expected because it was a matter of helping the family take care of each other and so on. But there was that one person in high school who grabbed me and said, "You are not going to be like your brothers." My brothers, the 3 ahead of me, were, let's say, challenged in school. The oldest one was asked to leave in the 11th grade. Went somewhere, another school, and then just dropped out. The second oldest brother was a drug addict and was in gangs, and that's the one she really liked because she tried to help him. Funny is, he's the one who graduated from high school, the first. And the third brother was asked to leave in the 9th grade and went to 1 or 2 other schools and dropped out in the 10th grade. So when I started, she said to me, "You're not going to be like them," and she tried to help me. So not to say that I didn't engage in all of those things that high school students do, or some high school students do. I was a rebel in a sense, but I actually stayed on a course of academic preparation. So I ultimately was able to pull everything together. She actually sat me down, helped me fill out the application. In those days, there was no such thing as computers and so forth, so we actually had to drive the application or mail the application to the institution. I applied to Cal Poly Pomona, which is the only school that I applied to, and it was like 10 miles from my house. She actually drove me there to drop the application off in the admissions office. And then when I had an interview for a program for first-gen low-income students, she actually drove me there and sat in her car while I did the interview and so forth. So I say it takes one person, and we all know that. And you are that person. You are the person that makes a difference for the students that you serve, whether it's 1, 5, 10, or however many. But it is important for you to see yourself as an agent, as a champion, to understand the realities that students face, much of which are the same that you face. So we look through our own lenses as we talk about transfer, and we think about the work that is important. And that's what we wanted to do today, is to give you some of those little bits of wisdom that we've learned along the way. I also wanted just to acknowledge yesterday, thank you, Janet, for doing the land acknowledgement. It is critical and important to make sure that we honor those who are the original inhabitants of the land that we are on, and to acknowledge that they are still here. It is not something in the past. It is important. So the Osage and all of the other communities that occupied this space that allow us to be here, thank you very much, because it is the ancestors through which we gather our strength. I wanted to continue the discussion a little bit from Dr. President Pink. it's funny because I've known him for about 20 years, maybe. We were on panels together, and we were part of organizations. He was chair of the Dream Deferred Conference through the College Board, which is a conference for and about African American students. And I was chair for Prepárate, which was a conference for Chicano Latino students, and we worked together for several years. And I haven't seen him in probably 10 years or so, and it was just great when I saw his name on the program before, so it was really good to see him. And the interesting thing is, a lot of what he talked about is stuff that we know is important, and it's even greater because a lot of what he talked about is what we wrote about in our book. It's important. The things that we talk about, institutional priority is our number one tenet in our book. Designing programs specifically for transfer student, looking at how the family is engaged, all of those things are critical. So I wanted to talk a few minutes to continue his conversation, but also to talk a couple of other things that he touched on. And for me, it's about, the focus is on racial equity. It's about race. It is really, really important for us not to pull race out of this conversation, because for so many of our students, that's what it's about. When you look at the data and you look at the fact that in California and across the nation, over 60% of the students who start college start at a community college, and with dismal transfer rates, there's a problem. We need to be thinking about what we can do. When you look at men of color, and in a program at UCLA, 70% of the students are women in this program. And it's a program for first-gen, low-income students of color. Where are the men? And what are we doing for men of color and men in general at our institutions? What programming has been developed? We have to think about men of color. We have to think about race. We have to look at the fact that 71% of white students transfer, 71% more, their rates of transfer are higher than students of color. Why is that? What is it about that experience in our high school, in our community college, and in our institutions that create that kind of a difference? It is really important for us to think about the transfer pathway as a place to get on and get off and get on and get off, because that's the reality of what students do. We cannot think that it's a place that you start at and then you end somewhere. So many of our students, particularly now in this pandemic, have had to step away. And what are we doing to ensure that they get back on track? What are the critical factors that we should be thinking about for students as they move through our institutions? And it comes back down to, for me and many of us, to social justice. It's an economic, it's a moral, it's an issue that we should all be concerned about. Because if so many of our students of color are at beginning our institutions and never get a certificate, never get a degree, and just kind of go through that revolving door, we have a problem. And it is really important for us to be thinking about that. And many of us have had conversations on something we call early identification. We should be talking to high school counselors to change the conversation about community college. We always say community college is college, period. We should have students prepare to enter a community college the same way we ask them to prepare for a university. Why are we saying, oh, well, you can always go to a community college and you don't have to do anything until July? Well, by then it's too late. So we need to be thinking about putting that practice and changing the conversation with high school counselors and teachers about college, a community college, and ensuring that they provide the same kind of incentive and support for students to be thinking about. It's about equity versus equality. So people are always saying, you know, it's very important to have equality. Well, sure it is. But equality doesn't focus on the disparities that we see. Equality assumes that everyone is starting from the same place. and everyone is going to get to the same place. Equity is about making sure that whatever we're doing is specifically focused for the communities that we serve. And it's really important to think about it through that lens, because if we just say we want everyone to be equal, it will never happen, because they don't start there and they'll never get there. And that's why we have these programs designed to help students who have been, let's say, removed from the educational experience throughout somewhere in their career. Sometimes, most of the time, through no, not on their specific terms. And it's really important for us to be thinking about what we can design and develop to help students. When we get transfer students in the community college, they're at all levels. One of the things that I remember is, as we were doing faculty dialogue, so we do a lot of things, summer programs, et cetera. One of the things that we do is faculty, or we call discipline dialogues between faculty. And so we bring, in this case, we brought some English faculty from UCLA with English faculty from 3 or 4 community colleges to just have that conversation. And it's so interesting that that just doesn't happen. You would think that it is. It's like, if I'm an English instructor, I'd like to know what your expectations are, and you should know what we teach. And it doesn't happen. But it was so interesting at the conversations and how they just kind of broke down these walls about that. We had one of our English faculty teach at a community college as an exchange, so they could get an understanding of what it's like. The day after the first class, she came to me and said, "I'm not sure this is a good idea." And I'm like, "Why?" She said, "The students are all over the place. You know, I have students that are like just at the very, basic level, students who are great writers." And I said, "And your expectation is that they all are great students because that's what you teach at UCLA, is someone who you think is at a certain level." And she said the very first night that she got there, a woman came up to her and said, "I have 3 children. I need this class to transfer. One of my children is developmentally disabled. So I have special things that I need to do. I might have to miss this class a few times, but I need this class, and please don't drop me." And I said, "And what did you say?" And she said, "I didn't know what to say." And I said, "So what did you say?" She said, "Okay, let's talk." And I said, "That's the perfect example of the thing you should have said." The response is, "Okay, let's figure out how we can do this for you." But it's that kind of a thing where these discipline dialogues are really important to begin to help faculty in UC or in the university. I'm focusing on UCLA. In the university, think about where students come from. And the perception of students transferring in are not as good as students who are coming in as freshmen. And we all know the data shows they do as well, if not better. They graduate at the same rates. They give back to the university at the same rate. So everything and anything that's involved, there is no real significant difference. And they need to begin to think about it that way. And then 2 other points, because I know I'm going over. What about academic culture? What is a culture of an institution? And one of the things that I always think about is that, high school has a particular culture, an academic culture. Community college has a different particular culture, and university has a different culture. And we don't do a good job of training students and helping them understand the culture. It's hard to change the academic culture of an institution. And I want you to think about what it is at your campus. And while it's hard to change it, we can do a better job of preparing students for it. If we help them understand what it is that they should be thinking about as they enter that institution, they will have a much better chance of succeeding. And it's really important. And a couple of other points of transfer sending culture. And I think this is a real important area, because do students attend your community college with the idea that they're going to transfer? Or do they go there and think, well, maybe as a byproduct, I can transfer? And what messages are coming from your campus, not only at the administrative level, but your faculty? I've always said, wouldn't it be great if a student walked into a classroom and before the instructor got into their lectures, they said, so where are you going to transfer? What program are you going to do to get, what certificate are you working towards? To show a genuine interest in the student, because if they hear that from a lot of different people, they may begin to think differently. One of the things that we used to do years ago is when we had peer advisors, we would have them go into the classrooms and say, think transfer, put it on the board. So when students come in, they see this, think transfer, before the professor comes in and erases the board and starts the lecture. It begins to generate some thought that may not be there. So those are the kinds of things. And then, of course, at our four-year universities, transfer receptive culture, which is all in the book, and you've probably seen everywhere because a lot of people are doing that. What are we as four-year universities doing to ensure that students are welcomed and are successful? And not waiting till the student comes to us, but being involved in this long before the student applies. And lastly, it's about students. It's really critical for us to put the focus back on the student and help the student understand why they need to transfer, how they need to transfer, how to connect, because connections, as you know, the networking is so critical. But also helping them understand that it's not them that may be the problem, that they are part of the solution. And it's the institution that needs to look at how they can reflect the student populations. Is there guaranteed housing for transfer students? Oh, what about students with families? Is there child care? All of the things that are really critical for students in making their decisions to go to a place need to be part of what we do as institutions at our universities. So taking the onus away from the student, ensuring that they understand where they, how they factor in this, but also looking at institutional priorities and what is critical and important. And throughout this conference, yesterday and today and tomorrow, is really about how do you move forward in ensuring that all students have an opportunity to transfer to the place they want to go. And one of the things that we do, and many of you do, is we provide students information. We provide students options. And for me, in all the work that we do, it's not to recruit students to UCLA. It's to help students understand that they need to transfer, and then focused on the institution that is best for them. I want all the students that we work with to come to UCLA, but I know it's not the place for them. I know that some of them won't be happy there, but I want them to understand why they can get, how they can get there, and if they prepare, they can go wherever they want. So it's really about a choice and making sure students have that choice and are able to make it based on what their needs are. Thank you. I'll turn it over to, oh, right. There is a question I want to leave you with, and this is one of the things that you should be doing over the course. We're going to think on it for 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes. How do you factor race and social justice in your work to increase transfer as a transfer sending or transfer receptive institution? So how do you factor race and social justice in the work? So you have 2 to 3 minutes to think about it, write down some thoughts and ideas, and we will discuss them after all the presenters have done their part. And with that, I'll ask Rose to come up.
Good morning. My name is Rose Rojas, and I work with the Maricopa Community Colleges in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm the District Director for Curriculum and Transfer. And so before I begin my portion, I'd like to thank Dr. Alfred, for his genius in laying down the beats and the tone for today's session. And he wasn't kidding in terms of anybody who's talked to me or has seen me present. I do have a little controversy that follows me, and I'm not afraid to embrace my inner Slim Shady, my Eminem, because, you know, everybody needs a little controversy, and this session would be empty without me. And so my portion of this session would be on pathways and partnerships. And I'm going to focus more on pathways and partnerships because there will be a session later on this afternoon that will focus on partnerships and how do you develop them, how do you nurture them, cultivate them, evaluate them, how many partnerships do you enter into. So that'll be later on this afternoon. But for today's agenda, I'm going to focus on pathways. And not the traditional pathways because we all know, I come from a community college, and we all work on guided pathways, structured pathways. We offer gen ed. We work with our universities to make sure that, as part of these academic pathways, students are able to transfer. But this is where the controversy comes in. So I'm going to, in my role as district director, I get approached a lot by universities. And so it's, on any given day, a university will come to us and they said, we're transfer friendly. We want your students. We want all of your students. And we have flexible policies. We have strong transfer programs. And so we really want to work with you. And I said, that's fantastic. We want transfer-friendly partners, right? And I said, because we have a group of CTE students, career and technical education students, who have occupational courses. And you don't accept CTE pathways or occupational courses are non-transferable? Okay, we'll work on that. But then we have this other group of students, these transfer students, and they have prior learning assessment. They have military credit, standardized exams, industry-recognized credentials, and you don't accept prior learning assessment and transfer? Okay, we're gonna have to work on that too. Okay, so no CTE, no prior learning assessment. Okay, I do have a group of transfer students. There was a few colleges that closed down, and they bring with them national accredited coursework, right? So we want to help these students get you only accept regionally accredited coursework? So now you just pretty much eliminated 75% of our student transfer population. Because at a community college, we're seeing more and more students who are choosing to take CTE pathways, occupational, AAS degrees. We're seeing more and more students who are coming in with military credit, standardized exams, and industry-recognized certs. And so Maricopa is doing what they can to basically welcome these students. We're creating onboarding on-ramps, creating those access points so that we could better serve these students, maximize their previous learning, and apply it to a credential. But all of our effort is, I don't want to say wasted, but all of our effort doesn't help the transfer student when they go on to the university. And if you're not accepting CLEP, AP, IB, if you're not working with your community colleges to standardize those decisions, if you're not figuring out solutions to recognize prior learning assessment, then you're really not transfer friendly. You're really saying to the student, you're gonna have to start all over because you didn't start the right way, the way that we choose, the way we prefer. And that's not fair because everybody knows transfer articulation principles. Principle number one is a student shouldn't have to repeat competencies that they've already achieved or earned. And so if that sounds controversial, then so be it, because I like to think of it as thought-provoking and passionate because I am a student advocate and I will do whatever I can to make sure that all learning counts. And so if we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, in the examples that I gave you, where's the diversity in the learning experience and how the student achieve that learning? Where's the inclusion of not including students who went to a nationally accredited institution and who wants, and is at your doors, who wants a bachelor's degree at your institution? And where's the equity in the transfer process if you blanket deny credit from certain institutions because they didn't start the right way or on the path that you prefer? So that's my piece. I'll leave you with that. I'll let it marinate. Hopefully I didn't offend or come off too strong. So my question is, I want you to tap into your M&M or your inner John Lewis, and in your role, how can you disrupt, cause a little controversy, and stir up good trouble with transfer pathways to support student success? Thank you.
Sorry, it's been a minute since I've been in front of people and not talking into a Zoom mic really, really close. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Herrera, and thank you, Rose, for that wonderful information. I'm really excited. And Rose, I know she had to step out, but I was just talking to Emily. Like when I was thinking about jobs, and I think I talked to somebody last night and the work you do, like, so I'm really trying to get this new thing trending, so I hope you all do it, like on your LinkedIn, Twitter, but I'm really wanting to think about everybody here as curriculum cartographers. Isn't that like a cooler way to talk about what we do when we're thinking about putting together these maps and putting together all these transfer pathways? So I'm trying to get it trending, so feel free, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you want to do. So my name is Leslie Daugherty. I work for the Education Design Lab. Does anybody know what the Education Design? There we go. EDL. Oh, I already dropped my sticky, so there we go. Part of working in the lab is that you always have to have lots and lots of stickies. So I'm a senior designer at the lab. I have been at the lab for 4 years. Before that, I spent over 15 years working in institutions, both at a 4-year private and a 4-year public, just 20 minutes on the other side of the river here in Illinois. So welcome to my home as well. It's not always this snowy, and we can sled. I know exactly where to go if you want to go later. So please follow me to Forest Park so we can do that. So I came to the lab, like I said, in 2017 to lead a project called the Seamless Transfer Pathways. And so that really was focused on how could we increase baccalaureate completion for transfer students within 30% in 6 years, right? Super easy, right? We just go in and do it, right? So, but to do that process, we really wanted to think about it from human-centered design, or as we call it, the learner experience. So how can we understand transfer and the barriers to transfer if we're not talking to our learners, if we're not talking to our students? And I say learner, and I use that word pretty broadly, and we do at the lab. For us, a learner is anyone that is or could be connected to your institution. So not only those that are enrolled, but who are those others that aren't enrolled, who are disengaged from higher education at this point. So that's what really we were looking at the Seamless Transfer Pathways. So when we start some of these projects, the first thing we ask learners are, what's it mean to be seamless? Okay. What's the word transfer mean? Right? What's a pathway, right? Those are all the sorts of things that we went and asked our learners to tell us, because if we are really thinking about building these pathways and really thinking about how we can impact transfer, we cannot do it without the learner. We cannot do it without their voice. So in design, human-centered design, and please, here's my plug, go to the Education Design Lab website, check it out. There's all sorts of fun things. Look at all the cool things that we are doing at the lab. But we focus on what's called the design mindset. So there are 4 pillars of the design mindset. And as I was thinking about this last night, I had to laugh at the first couple, especially knowing transfer and all my peeps out here. The first thing of transfer design mindset is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And I had to laugh because I think of all of you in this room when you're in those meetings and they're like, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and this is going to be great. And you're like, what about transfer students, right? Like you are the person that is asking that question, and like you're already comfortable with being uncomfortable in this area. The second one is let go of traditional mental models. Rose talked about that just now. Again, you're all doing this, right? You're all curriculum cartographers, right? We got that? We're in there? Okay. You're always thinking about how we can get beyond this traditional sense of what a transfer is. But the last 2 is what I want to talk to you about today and to push you a little. So suspend what you know. Okay, this one's a little bit harder because we know a lot of stuff, right? We've been doing this. Janet, I was thinking the other day, I'm 1 year younger than NISTS. So I've only 19 years. I was like, wouldn't that be fun if I had been in transfer for the same, but I'm 1 year younger. So I've been working for transfer for 19 years. I know a lot of stuff. So sometimes it's really hard to push us out of that comfort zone and to spend what we know. So I'm going to ask a question before we get to the question I'm supposed to ask the question about. Okay. So my first question is, really quick, can you identify one barrier, not the biggest barrier, right? One barrier for students transferring to or from your campus right now. Write it down. A barrier, okay? We need like the Jeopardy music. Aaron can sing it for me there. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. All right. My next question is why? Why is it a barrier? Why? Okay. My third question is, how do you know? How do you know? Have you talked to students? Is it a fact? Is it an assumption? So for those of you who have seen me, I love to use the dictionary to define words, especially when I'm presenting, because I think it's really important that we're all grounded in when I say the word assumption, what do I mean? So, because I have stickies, I wrote it down. Please note that this is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I have referenced them. Okay, so an assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen without proof. So that piece is so important. This is the without proof. So my question is, go back to that. How do you know this? Do you have the proof? Have you talked to your students? Have you asked them the why behind the why? Do you really understand the why behind that barrier? Have you explored it more? There was a lot of great conversation yesterday about talking about buy-in, like institutional leadership. How do we get the buy-in? That why is your buy-in. That student why. Understanding the learners and then taking that information and putting it in front of our presidents, our chancellors, our provosts, that's that buy-in. The students telling us their why is that buy-in. So I want you to think about that. And so the next one, the next part, we're still in design mindset, right? So the last one is explore what could be. Once we really understand that why, that gives us really the opportunity to think of what could be. How might we be more impactful? How can we say we understand what you're walking into this institution with because you've told us? And because now we understand better and move from there. I'll give one great example. Right now I am working with 5 rural community colleges. Any rural community colleges in the house? Woo! All right. They didn't get that excited, right? Okay, all right. So with rural community colleges, and this was in a CTE pathway and actually in healthcare, and they had a lot of students who were leaving the pathway in the middle of their clinicals. Ever happen, right? Getting to clinicals is pretty cool, right? It takes a lot to get to clinicals in a lot of these healthcares, and they were leaving. And they were like, well, we think it's because it's just, it's too hard, right? They didn't like it when they got there. Like, there's all these things, right? So we said, okay, let's ask them. And you know why they were leaving their clinicals? Because they couldn't afford the gas, right? How many times are we asking them to go to these places? They couldn't afford the gas. So as we explored what could be, every student in clinicals gets a gas card. And guess what? People aren't dropping out of their clinicals anymore, right? But we have to think about suspending what we know or what we think about or what we think we know to explore what could be with our students. So I really implore you, as you think about all the other wonderful things you've thought about today, to think about when it comes to these curriculum pathways, when it comes to thinking about these transfer students, how can we suspend what we know to really explore what we could be for impact? So the question I have for you is, how can we move from a campus culture that says, we heard you, so this is what we designed for you, to, we hear you, please come with us to the table to design with us. 3 minutes.
All right. We've been making you work. Now we're going to make you work harder. I am Dr. Mark Allen Poisel. I work at the University of Central Florida. I've had an amazing and interesting and quirky career path in higher education, but it fits my personality really well. I'm going to take you to the point of advocacy and action. We've had 3 great speakers who really put it out there for us, who are really getting us to think about what we need to do, to really put that in place so that we can begin to think about what's next. What can we do as individuals? What can we do as groups? What can we do with institutions to make the transfer experience what it should be for all of the students that want that experience. So I'm going to talk about advocacy and storytelling. And I'm going to give you the basics. And I've been warned I have 7 minutes, so just so you know, as a faculty member, I lecture in 2 and 3 hour blocks. So I've got to get a 3-hour lecture in 7 minutes. So we are going to move fast. I want you to remember 3 things. 3 key things about advocacy. I want you to remember knowledge is power, planning is everything, and it's nothing without action. I want you to remember those 3 things. So the first, knowledge. You better know your students. Know your data, know your students, because those are the people that you're advocating for. It isn't about you, it's about them, so you better know them. You got to watch, you got to listen, you got to learn. Our institutions, our faculty, our staff, our policies, our procedures are some of the quirkiest, craziest, weirdest things out there. And if you try to use logic, forget it. It's like trying to predict the stock market right now. There's just no logic out there and nothing makes sense. All right? Watch, listen, and learn. All right? Think about what your institution, what individuals are doing to help our students and to harm our students. Gain that knowledge, because you're going to need to share it often. And we can all tell stories of both sides of that equation. Know it, write it down, keep them. Like the speaker said yesterday, know your data. Data is power. Administrators, leaders, they love the data. My institution just elevated a position to the cabinet level of Chief Analytics Officer because everybody wants to know the data. Know that data. All right. The most important thing you have to know, and we're going to talk about it in a second, you're going to work on it, is your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And at the end, I'll tell you my story and my why. All right, now you got a plan. You got to have a vision. You need to set some goals. Write it down. Figure out what you want to accomplish and put it in writing. Put it on a sticky note. Put it on your computer. Put it on your wall. Put it out there for people to see, but more importantly for your students to see, to let them know what your goals are. And then you got to have a strategy. Goals are great, but if you don't have a strategy to make them happen, they're words on a piece of paper. All right? So we got to go out and we got to do that. Gather your allies and your naysayers. Know who's in your corner and who's not. Because each of them is going to need a different story. They're going to need a different perspective on that data and your knowledge, and you're going to have to figure out how to communicate it to them in different ways. I have a rule of 5. I teach this in my leadership class. I've been teaching it to my staff for 30 years. Always have 5 things in your pocket. 5 stories about your students. 5 pieces of data. 5 proposals. My boss used to laugh at me all the time because she would say, well, you know, we could take advantage of this grant if we had a proposal. After she said that to me about 3 times, I realized that there's always going to be opportunities out there. I just have to be prepared for the right time, place, and manner. So I always have 5. Now, I will tell you, in about 30 years, I've only had about 5 work. So you have to be okay with the fact that you've got 5 great ideas, but it might take 30 years to make them happen, okay? But you always have them ready. I can't tell you the number of times that a development officer has come to me and say, hey, we've got a person who wants to donate some money. What would you do with it? I said, here, pick one of these 5. Always have 5. All right, so now you've got some knowledge. You've done some planning. It's time for action. You got to put all of those things into place. You got to meet with others. You got to talk with your students. You have to have conversations. And you know what? It doesn't always have to be in a committee meeting. God knows we love committee meetings in higher education. It can be at lunch. It can be at the hallway. It can be on campus walking around. I don't care where you have the conversations, but you've got to have those active conversations. Now, I'll tell you, my boss, that same boss who wanted the 5 things, she called me the sleeping lion. I was like, really? I don't see that. And she looked at me and she's like, are you kidding me? Half the time you're an introvert and you say nothing, and the other half of the time you growl like a lion and scare the heck out of people. It's like, okay, I kind of get it, maybe. Be willing, in whatever audience it is, to be the person that says, hey, what about? What about transfers? Don't have the fear and say, hey, I'm not this director, I'm not this VP, I'm not this person, so I can't. Because as soon as you say you can't, you're right, you can't. Don't fear the people who are going to roll their eyes at you. I would be on my private island somewhere in the Caribbean if I had enough money for every time people rolled their eyes at me. They do it all the time. I don't care, because I'm persistent and passionate about what I do, so it's worth me repeating it. I also believe in the philosophy sometimes in higher education. You have to remind people till they are sick and tired of hearing you say it, and then they're finally willing to do something just to shut you up. Okay? So I am always that person in the meeting that says, hey, what about transfers? Always. And it doesn't matter what level I am. I will tell people I've had an interesting career. I advocated as an advisor, as a coordinator, as a faculty member, as a director, as an AVP, as a VP, at all those levels. I decided to retire, and that didn't work out very well. Because as you can imagine, I don't sit still very well. So now you know what? I'm back to being a coordinator. I'm doing what I love. I work with a program for transfer students. I teach leadership. I have a great time. But I'm still the coordinator in the room with the directors and the other people that says, hey, wait a minute. Because we need to do that. People need to know that we care and that we're passionate. They need to know that we're bold. We have wildly ambitious goals and we have wildly important goals. And I don't care whether you wig or you wag. You just got to do it. Timing is everything. Be consistent. Be persistent. Do it when you need to do it. And that doesn't mean it has to be just with the president. Do it in your committee meetings, having conversations over lunch, talking it with your fellow colleagues. Remember that when we advocate, we don't always advocate up. It isn't about getting into the president's office all the time. We're advocating with the people we work with. We're advocating with our students to empower them. I love to advocate across the spectrum. How many of my colleagues don't get it, don't know it, don't understand it, or don't want to? Guess what? That is the biggest part of the advocacy piece, is across. Sure, we got to work with our boss, and we can't get into the president and those sorts of things. But you know what? There's a lot that happens at this level. And I can tell you, having been a senior leader at an institution, it didn't matter how badly a president wanted to do something, because if the faculty wasn't on board, they just laughed at him and said, not happening. It's not always about the president. It's about us and about our students. So remember that. Remember that a key part of your job is all that knowledge you gained, you have to educate other people. As advocates, we are always educators. And we were talking about it in our advisory board meeting. We've been talking about transfer for a long time. I've heard some of the same things over and over again for the last 30 years. We just have to keep doing. So, now for your questions. It's all about the why. And so I'm going to tell you my story, my why. I also was a first-generation low-income student. I graduated 4th out of 500 in my high school class, and I was told I wasn't good enough to go to college. I was told poor kids don't go to college. You just need to work in the mills, because that's what your dad did, that's what your uncles did, that's what you need to do. And then I had a woman say to me, "What are you talking about? Why would you waste all of that you have, all the ability, the knowledge, your passion? You love to read, you love to books, you go to college." Well, it wasn't easy, and she knew it wouldn't be. But you know what? She figured out a way to help me. When she found out that although I had a place to live, I didn't have food to eat, she made sure somebody found me a job so I could work in the cafeteria, so I'd have something to eat. She made a difference for me. My first job post-master's was a transfer credit evaluator and an academic advisor. I had no clue what I was doing. Not at all. But I had an amazing mentor that says, listen, it's about the students. If you can make this work, you make it work. We're going to give them the credit they deserve. And if we can't figure that out, we're going to do something else for them. It was about her why and what she meant. And the last thing is, I tried to transfer a class. I can't experience for the students when they try to transfer a degree, but I can tell you, when I tried to transfer one class to a different institution, you would have thought I was driving a stake through the heart of the faculty for that one class. Okay? It should never have to be that way, and it should never have to be that hard. So my role is to make sure that it's not. That's why I came out of retirement, because it's all about the students and it's about what I do. That's my why. So the question is, what's yours? What's your why? Why should you be advocating for transfer students, and what does that mean to you? And then what do I want faculty, staff, and leaders to know about the transfer experience? We want you to take a few minutes. We want you to write down some things with this. We're going to come back. We're going to let you ask some questions, and then we're going to move on to an action plan.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to transition to the next part of today's workshop. Now, I don't know about you, but my mind is already swimming. We've just listened to 4 experts synthesize decades worth of knowledge in the transfer field and remind us of some critically important themes and ideas in our work. So you've probably thought about many of these things before, but the test is now, okay, so what? But what's next? What am I going to do? The themes we've talked about today are racial equity, partnerships and pathways, elevating the student voice, and being a transfer advocate. What I love about a workshop like this is that what they've talked about today is applicable to every single person in this room, regardless of how long you've been in the field, and regardless of how long you've been working with transfer specifically. You can come to this at any point where you are, with whatever problem you're dealing with and grappling with, and think of now an idea based in these themes that you can bring to fruition on your campus. But I know that listening and thinking is one thing. Doing is an entirely different matter. And figuring out how to take these little nuggets, actually they were pretty big nuggets, right? Pretty big nuggets of knowledge and wisdom, and transforming them into something that will work on your campus, in your department, with your specific colleagues, and how we're going to move it forward. So this is the time that we're going to open it up for just a few minutes to your specific questions for these experts based on what they've talked about. Maybe something caught your attention. We want to dig in and help you dig in and think through what you've been reflecting on, what you've been envisioning, what you've been dreaming about. We want to give you some more tips and structure to take that and do it on your campus. But before I open it up to your questions, I wonder if you will do something with me. As I mentioned, we did a pretty late night pivot to this particular session today. And these folks didn't know it at the time, but they were in the right place at the right time for me. They may or may not regret it for them. They happened to be walking by and exactly when I needed them. So they stayed up late thinking and getting ready. Would you help me thank them one more time for being here with us? I so value their expertise and their willingness to just jump and pitch in, so thank you again, speakers, appreciate that. Okay, so now is the time to turn it to you. We want to know what you're thinking about, what you're dreaming about, what you're working on, and what you're planning. We're going to spend a few minutes with the experts, then we're going to open it up. We do have a full-on activity for you to do after you get a little bit more knowledge from these folks that you need to get started. You didn't know that today's wonderful tool, cutting edge, was Post-its. But sometimes you just got to start with the Post-it, and it leads to great things. So we've got some mic runners out in the audience, and so who would like to open us up with some questions for our expert? We've got immediately question right there. Let's go.
Before she asks her question, I want you to understand the reality is we were up late, but it wasn't preparing for this. We were in the bar. Oh, I'm sorry. Collaborating.
All right. My question, I think, is maybe more specifically for Rose, but if anyone else has experience with that, have you ever seen schools shift from only accepting credits from regionally accredited schools to accepting credits from regionally and nationally accredited schools?
Yes, and I actually, on the NISTS website, I have a blog post exactly with the research and the literature accreditation bodies. Many of you probably saw the joint statement that came out from the 3 associations that basically is reflecting the same thing. Don't use accreditation as the sole reason of denying credit. And so they just released that in December. And so in working with our transfer partners, that's what I lead with in terms of, we accept nationally accredited. Our faculty make decisions for both, regionally accredited and nationally accredited. So if you trust them in one space, why don't you trust them in the other, So it's been tough. I took a lot of hits for back in 2016 when ITT Tech, a lot of these institutions closed down. There were a lot of students in our service area who were displaced. And it broke my heart because out of these students, I'll just give you a specific example. There were about 3,000 from ITT. There was about 800 nursing students. Out of that 800, there were about 300 of them in their final semester. And the fact they were in our offices talking to counselors, crying, basically being told by other institutions that they had to start all over, but not at Maricopa. We changed our policies. We basically said each student deserves an equal opportunity to have evaluation, assessment, because it doesn't matter where or how they started their pathway to completion. We should respect and honor that.
I love that. Thank you, Rose. And so that goes right back to the tools, having the research right there. So certainly the joint statement that Rose references is a powerful tool for you to have. One of those 5 things, right? One of them is a tool, that statement in your pocket. But it goes to that advocacy piece as well, and being the voice in the room that says, we've got to look at this a little differently.
Yeah, and if you want to talk to me, I could share that with you and what we did to change that practice.
Thank you for that question. Next question. You guys have to arm wrestle because you put your arms up at the same time.
Hi, my name is Caitlin, she, hers pronouns. So I've been at and work at predominantly flagship institutions. What has been helpful for you in talking to predominantly STEM faculty around transferring credits in STEM classes? And maybe bridging gaps, or what programs have helped in bridging gaps if there are gaps on the syllabi from a transferring class, or bridge programs in that kind of sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a huge one, and President Pink mentioned it yesterday about how when four-year universities make decisions about courses and preparation, and how sometimes they make them because it's good for them, but not thinking about the impact. I have a perfect example that happened at UCLA when they decided to change the preparation for our life science majors and go from specific courses to these block courses, and not realizing that they decided they were going to have LS 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, LS4 had no articulation anywhere from anyone. And LS3, only a few of the community colleges had that. So if they were expecting students to have 1, 2, and 3 for sure, then they've knocked out 90% of the students because they were not able to get that course. So they had to step back a minute and figure out, what do we need to do? So that's where we began the discipline dialogues to talk about this. And, the idea that, a faculty person from community colleges and a faculty person from a university don't know what's going on with each of them is, for many of us, we think, well, that's so simple. Why wouldn't you? But it doesn't happen in most cases, which is why we need to have those connections. We've started an inclusive excellence program at UCLA in the STEM field. Our faculty, some faculty of color, and our Dean of Life Sciences, an African-American woman, is really focused on 2 things. And one, how do you prepare faculty to bring students of color into the institution and show them that there are things beyond preparation that are critical in the review? So looking at, critical race theory is a perfect example. Most faculty in STEM don't have much clue about what that is. For them, it's about STEM. And what happens to students in a classroom there or in the labs has nothing to do with race or anything else, when we know that's not true. And so helping them understand some of those things is really important, but also looking at what our requirements are. So making sure the conversation is both ways. And as they think about changes, because change always happens, making sure that they look at all of the students that it will impact and have conversations with community college faculty and others. So it is hard because some faculty are so focused on their area and what we say have blinders about all the other stuff that's coming about, but just keep trying to have those conversations and open up that door.
Do you have something as well?
When I talked about data, data is your most powerful ally. So I had these same struggles. I worked at a large institution, you know, only our faculty can teach the classes sort of a thing. I just pulled out the data. I worked with the IR folks, and when I could start showing that our faculty didn't realize who the transfer students were, let alone who their graduates were, so I just pulled out the data, and I said, okay, here are the ones that were the natives. Look at their GPAs and their success. Here are the transfers. You're so concerned about the transfers coming in when you haven't even bothered to look to see who your graduates are, who's doing well in their jobs, that you can't even answer the question. You're making assumptions. And I got into trouble, I admit it, which, if you can tell, that happens often with me, because I said to a faculty member, I said, look at these and look at these scores. What did you do to dummy down the natives? Because they aren't doing as well as these transfer students are. So what did you do? Because now you've caused a problem. They didn't take that very well. But the reality is I could use the data. And when you're talking STEM, engineering, sciences, those sorts of things, you need to have the numbers.
Anybody want to add? I think these are great recommendations. I want to point you to a couple of tools, if that's okay. So great things in Michigan are happening around curricular alignment. There's some blogs on our website from Katie Giardello, who's a great resource for that. Good things are happening in Ohio. There are slides from our conference archives about their curriculum alignment. They are also going to be presenting at the virtual conference, so be on the lookout for that. If you're hearing us throw around the word data a lot and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't do data, whatever, we have a couple of tools that you might want to take a look at. One of them is the Beginner's Guide to Transfer Data on our website. It is available now. It's a free PDF download, and I certainly encourage you to look at that. It's got different categories of data that you might want to start pulling and begin building that picture of who your transfers are and what they're doing. We also have an addendum to that piece. It's not an addendum, it's a whole new thing. It's about 40-something pages long. Coming out a little bit later this spring is using data in our work with transfer students, and it helps you go a level deeper once you've got your general profile, asking and answering these questions using data, so that stuff's going to be coming out. But this is a topic that's not unique to you, I know. And so there are people here having those same conversations, so reach out. And I know, too, it's one thing to say, for Mark Allen to say, well, I went into their offices and said, what's wrong with your data? I get it. I am also a nobody on the campus, so I couldn't just walk into somebody's office either. It goes back to the advocacy piece and the relationship piece. You may need to get here, and you know you're here. But you look at your sphere of influence and you go one level up, and you see who they can go one level up and who they can go one level up, and you're building all of those relationships and partnerships, presenting the story, and it certainly does take time. But you connect with who you can connect with and help them carry the message further if you can't go there yourself. Great question. We do have another question for our experts? Right here.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm from the Virginia Community College System. And I was at a major university for most of my career before that. And I've worked with transfers in both capacities. And one of the things that I hear a lot from the four-year side is that the benefits of transfer students are that they bring diversity and grit to the institution. And I would like to take that conversation to a deeper level and help those at the four-year schools recognize that the advantages of transfer students go far beyond that, and that those transfer students are bringing a cultural and also social capital because of and connected with the diversity that they bring. And I'm not crazy about the term grit, but however you want to think about grit, but that perseverance. So I'm wondering if you all have any suggestions for how to have those conversations, how to initiate the conversations, and how to take them to a level where the four-year schools are thinking about all of the benefits that transfer students bring at an institutional level, at a social justice level, at a student level.
Sure. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think in all of the work that we do, we start with an asset mindset. So really leading with that and having that conversation, but I think it's also bringing that lived experience and those student stories to that administration and having that and doing it from their lens. We have something at the lab that we do, and it's called a gallery walk, and I'm not sure, you all maybe have done a gallery walk, but it's really displaying like what is the lived experience of these students, what are they telling us, what do they love about this institution, right? What were some of the barriers and the opportunities, and displaying that in a way that everybody at the institution has a time to really sit down and experience what that learner is doing. And we found that especially in our seamless transfer pathways that it has to be both the 2-year and the 4-year coming together to have that conversation, even sometimes bringing in that high school, right, depending on what your transfer looks like. But I think really it is getting those experiences and taking them directly to your administration from that learner point of view. And I think you're right. And I don't know, I'm like, how could they not want all the transfer students? So that's, with my lens too, but.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the first question I always ask is it intentional?
Right.
And, you have this idea of transfer students being backfill, or they're part of the original plan, and the numbers, do they fluctuate from year to year so that you could accommodate whatever your needs are on the campus level? And at many of our institutions now, and I'm happy to see this because 20 years ago this was not as prominent or prevalent, is that there are specific numbers. So you will take in 2,000 transfer students, or you will take in 150, or whatever it is, your number every year, and you won't change that much. And it's really important to be intentional about what you're trying to do. And yes, the whole idea of diversity coming through the transfer process, for me, is a buzzword. People are like, oh yeah, diversity is a new word, let's do that, and we can do that through transfer. But you need to be intrusive and intentional about why you're doing it and what you're providing. So it's not about just bringing them to the campus, but ensuring that they excel and succeed and transfer and go on to graduate, professional, or whatever positions they want to do. And I think part of that is done through telling the stories and showcasing the students, because how many of you here know single mothers or single fathers in your transfer pool? Raise your hand. And how many stories are out there about those students? How many of you have students who are going to college with their children? That's a new thing too now, because there are a lot of older students who are coming back to college. What kinds of services are available for students? And the other part of it is what support services on the campus. And yesterday we had a conversation, the day before I guess it was, we had a conversation in our advisory board meeting about service, whether it's support or service, and what we're doing in terms of that and how we're providing. Are we providing a service, or are we providing the support? Because they're very different in terms of those kinds of things. And I think those are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about, is what is there for the students, and what is the institution able to provide, and how do they display that in action and in also promotion? Because we need to ensure that they look at the population of students. And some of the questions that we ask in our mapping program is, one, do the institutions even know who their students are? Do they even know what that transfer student population looks like? Do they know how many students of color, how many single parenting students, how many students who are non-traditional, which are really more traditional now than they are non? And do they know those things, and are they providing the support in those areas that will help those students? And it always goes back to data. But in addition to the data, it's about the lived experience. You have 45% of your students that might be older than 30. And what are you doing for those students? And I'm going to come back to the orientation piece because that's one of the things that we have all talked about forever. And it's why are you hiring students who came in as freshmen to be advisors to the students who are coming in as transfer? What kind of information can they really give a student who is concerned about those kinds of things? Yes, I can tell you about this on our institution and that, but can you talk about that experience of what a transfer student is? And no, there is not one experience. There are a lot. But having one of those experiences at least makes the student feel welcomed. And it's really important for our students to understand that it's just not a fly-by orientation, but there's a real investment in that. How many of you have orientations that are overnight for transfer students? Wow, none. How many of you have orientation programs for freshman students that are overnight? Why aren't we having those programs? Because, as our orientation used to say, transfer students are really busy. They don't want to come over, they don't want to stay overnight. They want to go in and get the information and so on. Yeah, that's true for some. But have you asked the students? Have you actually asked students? And have you provided that opportunity to see if they would do it? And when we did, they did. They came. They stayed. So it's a matter of what is it that you're, are you making the assumptions based on what you think rather than what students want? And it's really looking and being, as I said at the beginning, intentional about it and intrusive to ensure that you are providing the kinds of support that is critical for our student success.
And I would like to add, does the same conversation and questions carry over to your international students? Because I feel like there's more attention and more desire to recruit international students than transfer students. And each of them do bring rich experiences and talents and skills with them. So I like to, because I find it funny that it's not the same, you know, and they're prospective students, and they all should be valued and treated the same.
Okay, so let's bring it back to tools. I can think of a couple that I would point you to. Let's keep in mind that those stories are data. That's qualitative data right there. So if you're not doing focus groups or interviews with your transfer students, you can do a Google search. It'll probably come up focus groups for transfer students tackling transfer. The Aspen Institute and the CCRC, they have a whole guide with all the questions and all the things. If you're new to focus groups, it's got a tool right there for you. It'll come up, downloadable free PDF. I would also point you to something that we've got on our website called 5 practices for, wait, what did we call it? 5 essential practices for faculty for supporting transfer students or something like that. But what we're talking about here is data, but also challenging those deficit mindsets. And practice number 1 is about challenging deficit mindsets. And it's not like we intentionally have a deficit mindset. I don't think anybody goes into education and they're like, let me see how I can not give these students credit. So read those documents and put yourself in the positions of your faculty and of your administrators. It's got tips in there. Even if you're not a faculty member, the tips are broadly applicable enough that you can take something from that. So there are things out there, and it's those relationships, again, going to those relationships and sharing these stories. I would add, too, that when you're gathering student stories, you're not doing it just for the purpose of taking the stories to your administrators. There are so many purposes and uses for student stories. We know for recruiting purposes, students want to see themselves on your website. And so turn these into blogs, turn these into interviews, turn these into social media posts from those students, and then just let those stories be out there and proliferate. They will catch not only your students' attentions, but also your faculty and your administrators and your staff's attention. Good question. We will have another one right here in the front.
Thank you. You kind of segued into my question that I've been sitting here thinking about. So hi, everybody. I'm Shelley Stewart. I'm from the University of California, Riverside. So my question to those who are faculty, what strategies and techniques do you use, whether it's building your syllabus, in your classrooms, your pedagogy, that considers the concepts of equity, social justice, the intersectionality of identity for transfer students, or just students in general? Like, what techniques are you using to to be intentional and remain mindful of those things?
And I have one too.
I guess I'm the one that teaches at the moment. I think the first thing is you've got to put it right out there. It's in the syllabus. I appreciate you and what you bring to the classroom, and putting it all out there. I teach a couple different kinds of courses. Like I said, when I was bored and retired, so I teach graduate level higher education. I teach student success at the community colleges, and I teach leadership to sophomores and transfers and upper division students. And our focus is, when I talk about cultural leadership, when I talk about leadership in general, we go back to those concepts of people, that diversity, the inclusion, why that's important to leadership, why it's important in higher education, why it's important in student success. And you got to put it right out there. I do those kind of conversations in the first class. Appreciate the fact. I know, again, I'm a little biased, right? So I want to know who the transfer students are, even though I could go in and figure it out just because of my own knowledge base. But you ask those questions, or I put it out there and say, come and talk to me about it. What can I do to help you? What is it that you need to be successful, and what are we doing that impairs your success? And so I think it's just that welcoming aspect of it, being able to say, hey, I'm here, I'm going to listen. I know that there are challenges for you. Let me help you figure out how to navigate our system.
Yep.
And it's just kind of, I think it's the tone that you set with students. And I think it's whether you put it in writing, whether you say it individually. I have this thing, because, I don't have enough to do in life, I guess. I meet with all of my students. So I've got, 150 students this spring. They will all have a meeting with me, right? Because I need to know their individuality and what's impacting their success in my course.
I just want to add, I think one of the other things, I'm not faculty and I never want to be faculty, but I enjoy what I do. And I think part of it is just recognizing and acknowledging the experiences that these students bring, and not making assumptions, but being inclusive and allowing students to have conversations. Because I think one of the things that happens, from what I hear from some of our students, is that their stories are never shared. And the faculty might just talk about some of these things that are critical and important, but never giving an opportunity to have a dialogue, to have a conversation, to talk about what it's like to be 45 years old in a class with 20-year-olds, to talk about what it's like to have your tutor or peer mentor be someone who is younger than your children. Those are the kinds of things that our students experience. And so making sure that we're inclusive across the board as we're able to share that. And one of the other things that I think is really, really important, and we're trying to do at UCLA, is to have faculty who are transfer students wear it on their sleeves. Get out there and talk about the fact that you're a transfer student. So our students who are there can see, wow, there are transfer students that become faculty, that become administrators. Our chancellor at UCLA is a transfer student. And for the first few years that he was at UCLA, he never really said much about it. And in a meeting that I was in with him when we were talking and planning on strategies for community college visits, I said, why don't you ever talk about the fact that you are a transfer student? And he says, well, I do. I said, yeah, I heard you say, I'm this, that, and the other, and I transferred from, and then you go on, and you don't talk about that experience. I said, you need to talk about that experience so students see a chancellor that was a transfer student. And I said, that's an important vision for students to see. So ensuring that our faculty are really open and upfront about that, if they are, would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and Leslie, did you have something as well?
I was just going to say, when we were working our seamless transfer pathways, two of our institutions, they were sort of having a debate. Like, should we code them as transfer students on the class roster? Like, once they transfer, like what? And it went back and forth. Like, should we? And, and some of them were like, well, then they'll be treated differently. And then I'm like, well, do they want to be treated differently? Like, did we have this conversation with them? But so what they did, right, so this was sort of a compromise with the faculty, is that they put it in the syllabus. If you are a transfer student, very similar to what Mark Allen was saying. These are the resources. Come and talk to me. But here is actually a video on how to access the library, because we're assuming if you're in a 300 level, perhaps English class, that you've been to the library, like how to access it. What are those supports and services? And so how can we do it in a way, right, that you don't have to identify yourself if you don't want to, but if you do, we also have this in there. So it was just a quick, right, tweak that they made to be able to let the students in identify themselves if they wanted to.
I love that. And I'm going to point you again to our faculty guide that's on the website, the 5 key practices for faculty. Practice number 1 is about challenging deficit mindsets, but practice number 2 is know who your students are. And so one tactic is the syllabus, another tactic is an autobiographical assignment on the very first day, so that everybody's sharing a little piece of their story to the extent that they feel comfortable and the faculty receives that. And then practice number 3 is all about making those connections and helping them connect to departments. And so inviting those people into your class is another tactic, so that for that, just what we were talking about, the library, they have people there. So it talks about all of those kinds of things in there, and so this is a wonderful piece of conversation. I know, too, that we've got on the schedule here in St. Louis and also in the virtual some faculty training sessions, developing training sessions for faculty around transfer, so those resources are out there. Is Jackie Dewar in here by chance? I don't know. But Jackie's a great resource. Heather's a great resource. I know you know all of those. So good question. Thank you. Can someone help me with a time check real quick?
Yeah, and while we're time checking, I'm gonna plug the virtual conference and also say if you have faculty members that you're like, oh, look, there's this virtual conference and perhaps we can share and do that. Because I think that that's such an important piece, and I think we've been talking about this. How do we get more faculty members into spaces like these, right, to have these conversations is really important as well.
Do you guys want to take one more question, or do you want to go to? Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to move to the activity if everybody's cool with that.
All right. I'll just pose my questions as food for thought. Dr. Dantrell Smith, representing Tarrant County College, Fort Worth, Texas. How do you suggest we initiate the conversation on race within our circles when there's a war on critical race theory? How do you gain the confidence from within myself to strategically stir up good trouble when I myself am a minority? And so kind of some food for thought questions. I don't know if the panel wants to address them, but just wanted to throw those out there because I think they're important questions that need to be asked. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that is a real critical and important question. And we have to hit it head on. We can't hide from it. The fact of the matter is that we are under attack on critical race theory. So now's the time to stand up and have conversations about it, to bring in experts in the field, to bring in Kimberly Crenshaw, to bring in Devin Carvado, to bring in Danny Solorzano, these people who have written and talked about these things on a national level all over the country for years and years. And we need to embrace it, and we need to make sure that not only people of color, but all of our allies stand up along with it, because it is important. When you think about it, when you erase race from this factor, what do we have? And it's important for us to stand up as educators concerned about racial justice and equity and social justice. Race always plays a factor in this. The idea that we cannot talk about it is disturbing. The fact is Black Lives Matter, and you've got to say it. You have to say it. It is an important conversation that you cannot get away from. And you need to make sure that we deal with it and we talk about it. And this whole idea that's now coming up again is anti-Blackness. What are we doing in our institutions? What are our own values? How are they projecting or not projecting this anti-Blackness? What kinds of things are intentional and what kinds of things are not? And really important is to have conversations about it. We are in our department and now in my office having meetings, bringing in people to talk about it. Little actions that you do or say create challenges, and we need to understand what those are. So I think embracing it and hitting it head on and not shying away from it is important. Now, it's not an easy thing to do to be an African American man or a Latino female having these conversations with predominantly white leadership in our institutions. But the reality is that we need to galvanize the support from our allies and not be a black issue, a brown issue, a race issue alone. It has to be an issue that's important to our institutions that factor in the race piece, because that's really critical. So stand up and embrace it and really push forward. And do like Rose and ask the difficult questions to make people think about those kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to add to that. I'm a Hispanic female, and I'm a transfer student. And I'll just give you a specific example of what put fire in my belly. I went to Arizona State University. I took a Spanish class, and the instructor stopped me mid, speech, and basically said, no, that's how the Mexicans talk. And she was Argentinian. So right there, it just was appalling, and I was embarrassed, a lot of discomfort. But then that day on, I basically said, I will do whatever I can to advocate for transfer students, to make sure that that doesn't happen to another person based on their ethnicity or their dialect. And so I wanted to really, speak for and get to know more transfer students so that I can basically change policy and practices. And being, brown and having those conversations, I never felt that my voice wasn't heard. I felt my voice wasn't heard because I was saying things that nobody wanted to hear, So I didn't quite experience in terms of who was the mouthpiece. It was the message that was getting drowned out and denied.
Thank you for that excellent, thought-provoking question, Dentrell. Appreciate that. We are going to move into the action-focused part of this, where you begin to think on one of these ideas, pull something you've heard, and again, no matter how much expertise you're bringing to the table, try to come up with something that you want to try to do back home at your campus when you get back to work. So we've got some paper, pens, if you need that stuff, come and grab it. We've got markers, we've got stickies. You do what you need to do to start building an action plan. We're going to give you some prompts to help you think through that. But also our experts are going to be here, and we're going to be floating around the room. So if you get stuck or you have a question, you call somebody over. Dr. Marling is here as well. The other Dr. Herrera is here as well. Dr. Smith is here. So we've got folks here who can help you brainstorm some of these things if you'd like. So the questions that we have, I'm going to let Alfred give us the introduction there. But this time is for you, so stay in here as long as you need to work on your project. Or certainly if you're more comfortable going back to your room, you're welcome to do that. But we will be here to help you brainstorm. Brainstorming is my favorite. Alfred, you want to talk about these questions?
Sure. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that, you always go to conferences and you hear people speak and you hear this great information and so forth, and then you think about, okay, what do I need to do? How do I really make it real for me? And so years ago, we developed something like we call a strategic plan or an action plan. And it's the idea that you can walk away with something, the beginning of something, that helps you create some change. And it's really about change. And for me, it's like, okay, the first thing you're going to say to yourself, because I said it and others say it, is like, oh man, there's just so much to do, and I don't know if I can do that because, there's not a lot of support there, and I'm just this, low person on the totem pole to be able to do that. It's not true. None of it is. The reality is you can do whatever it is you want to do. It takes one step, and that one step is to identify one thing. You don't need to solve the entire issue. You do it piece by piece. And one of the things that I want to say is, what is one thing you would like to achieve in developing or enhancing support for a transfer-sending, transfer-receptive culture on your campus? We don't have a student organization focused on transfer, you say. So sponsor one. We don't have, programs for transfer students that are parents. Sponsor one. One little thing changes the lives of so many people. So the first thing to think about is, what's one thing you think you'd like to do on your campus? Something that is not there that you'd like to see. Something that is there that you want to build on. What is that one thing that is critical to you to really focus on what kinds of things create change and positive change for your students? Secondly, is there one element of that you want to focus on? So, one of the things in a workshop that I did about this before, they said, we don't have a transfer center on campus. And we really want a place for transfer students to go. And we cannot get support. We cannot, they will not do it. So make that your office. Start wherever you can. The second part of it, list the steps you're going to take to achieve the goal. What do I need to do? Well, first you need data. Second, you need the research. Third, you need the lived experiences. And then you figure out all of these kinds of things that are important. So you're going to say that I'm going to do this. I'm going to look at the data to see who our students are. I'm going to look at the support services that are available to our students. And then I want to create these kinds of things. The next one would be, how do you identify allies? So we've talked a little bit about allies. And the reality is there are a lot of people out there that will support. And it's important to identify those people. Find the faculty who are transfer students. Find the staff who are transfer students. Find the programs that are available for students. And one of the things that we do in the work that I do is what we call transfer mapping spaces. What place on your campus or places on your campus are transfer friendly, transfer focused, transfer intentional, and should be transfer hotspots? Find those places, because those are the places that our students will migrate to. Find those places, and those are the allies that you have in developing that point. How do you involve them? How do you include the student voice? Because so many of us do this work, we understand having the voice of the student is important. We don't know all the answers, but we do know how to get the answers, and that's through student voices as well. The next part would identify the challenges, including people. There are people out there that don't like this issue. They don't like transfer students in general. We're not sure why. I could give you reasons, but they're probably not repeatable here. But identify the challenges. One of them, the first one that comes to mind is financial. We don't have any money. It's a matter of priorities. So you figure out how you change that priority. You figure out in your own office or through your own department what you can do a little differently that will allow you to think about those kinds of changes. You think about, and I learned this from the president of COE, the Council for Opportunity in Education, many, many, many years ago. Arnold Mitchum, African-American man who's an incredible, incredible guy. He was the president for COE, founder and president for years and years and years, and he retired recently. But he would always, at their large conferences of like 1,500 people and so on, he would always have a fundraiser for people who were not supportive of COE. And I asked him, why are you supporting this person who doesn't support COE? He says, I need to know who my challengers are. I need to know what their tactics are. And I need them to know that we will support them even if they don't support us. Because somewhere along the way, it's going to come full circle. So the way that I took that is you need to know who the people who are going to challenge you are, because you can help develop a strategy to get around them. Go through them if you can, but get around them if you can't. And it's important to know who those people are so that you know the kind of strategy that you need to do that. Who are the decision makers on your campus? Who will ultimately be able to decide this is what we're going to do? Is it chancellor or president or vice or so on and so forth? Or is it just is it a department head, a dean? Find those people and figure it out. Do some research on your campus or institution. The funding sources on and off campus, there are a lot of people out there that have funds available. We just have to find them. And the common thing is, oh, not a lot of people want to fund transfer. True, not true. I think you can find some out there. It takes some work. I don't know how many of you have development people in your divisions. At our campus, we have development people that really are not doing anything for transfer. So you pose the question, why aren't you? What is available? And really push those. And then, of course, there's always the issue of assessing and measuring your success or your not so success. Learning from that. How are you going to measure if you've made progress on implementing it? How are you going to know you're successful? How are you going to know how to change things if you don't do an evaluation and assessment? And not at the end, through the whole process. Because it's a continuous evolution of work, and you need to make sure you keep up to date and not get stagnant with, oh, we've done this now, 5 years later, we're doing the same exact thing. You need to make sure that it's relevant to the students that you're serving. So we're going to give you time to think about that. Some of you may already be doing that. One little thing, whatever it is that you want to do, and we'll be available to respond, answer questions. You can raise your hand. If you don't want our help, that's okay too. We will be at the doors before you leave to collect your, no, I'm kidding. But really, it's just like, this is something that you can do to think about what one thing you want to do for your campus and your students to make it real. Thanks.